It's April 6th, 2012, just an ordinary night in Griekwastad, a tiny little town deep in the interior of South Africa where everyone knows each other and no one locks their doors. At the Nauhaka farm, the Steenkamp family is ending the day as usual. Dion, the respected father, and Crystal, the mother who built everything with her own hands. Martella was only 14 years old and full of life, and Don, the quiet son, was 15 years old. Suddenly, gunshots echo in the darkness. A teenager runs into the local police station, covered in blood from head to toe, completely disoriented, screaming for help. They shot my family, everyone is dead. The only survivor is the boy himself, who just arrived. But what the police found on that farm afterward changed the life of that quiet town forever and revealed a monster that no one ever imagined existed there. I'm Marcos Campos, welcome. If you like real stories and criminal cases, I invite you to subscribe and follow the channel because every week there are at least 3 long episodes like this one here. Becoming a member helps me a lot, but if you can't, that's fine. Just like and comment, even an emoji. Announcements done. Let's get to the facts. On the Nauhaka farm lived the Steenkamp family. The father, Dion, was a successful and respected farmer, heir to a tradition that had already lasted for generations. The mother of the family, Crystal, had built something of her own, a brand of homemade cookies that grew so much it started being sold in major supermarket chains. They had money, they had stability, and to outsiders, they seemed to have an almost perfect life. Even so, they weren't a showy family. They lived well, comfortably, but in a discreet way. The children completed this picture. Martella, 14 years old, was described as cheerful and outgoing, full of energy. Dawn, on the other hand, a year older than her, was the opposite. Reserved, quiet, extremely dedicated to his studies, the kind of student teachers love. And Dion, the father of the family, was very active in the community and, of course, in raising his children. He gave horseback riding lessons to young people. He was a deacon at the local church and even served as the principal of a local high school. Crystal and Dion had known each other since they were teenagers. She came from a humble family, and after getting married, she built that successful cookie business I mentioned with her own hands. The upbringing of the children was strict. Both of them attended boarding school. High grades and good behavior were not optional. No parties, no sleepovers, no friends at home, discipline and rules. To the whole town, the Steenkamp family was an example, united, respected, with no visible conflicts, until, on April 6th, 2012, all of that fell apart. That night, a teenager drove alone to a local police station. He was Don Steenkamp, 15 years old, terrified, covered in blood, completely panicked and disoriented. He walked in and immediately screamed for help. He said his family had been shot. He said everyone was dead. When the police asked whose blood was on that boy's clothes, he replied that it was his sister's, Martella, who, according to him, had just died in his arms. He said he got home and found his parents and sister shot. He tried to help them, but he realized there was nothing more he could do, so he got into his father's car and went to get help. The police followed Don to his family's farm, and what they found there was such a violent scene that it left even the most experienced officers shaken. After all, it was a small town, kind of rural. There weren't that many crimes there, especially not of this magnitude, a family massacre. Dion, Crystal, and Martella were dead inside their own home. The tranquility of Griekwastad would never be the same after that. The forensic team entered the house a few hours later. Right in the initial surveys, the investigators identified something crucial to the case. The weapons used in the crime did not come from outside. The shots had been fired with the weapons from the house, both belonging to Dion Steenkamp and kept inside the house itself. Dion was hit by 3 shots, one in the right shoulder and 2 in the head, one behind the ear and the other at the back of the skull. In addition, the forensic experts found blunt force injuries on his head, as if he had been struck before or during the attack. Crystal was shot twice, one shot from the front and another at the back of the head. But it was Martella, the couple's youngest daughter, who suffered the most extreme violence. She was shot 4 times, twice in the chest and twice in the head. Like her father, she also had marks of blows to the skull area. The experts concluded at that moment that these assaults were carried out with the very weapons used in the crime, which were used as blunt objects for the attack. When the more detailed examinations were completed, the case took on a different shape, an even greater weight. The reports indicated that Martella had suffered sexual violence just a few hours before she died. But it wasn't the first time, because there were old scars already healed, at least on the skin, consistent with previous abuse. This indicated that the girl had been abused for some time. The forensic examination was also able to determine something important about the dynamics of the crime. Dion and Crystal, the couple, died almost at the same time, but Martella didn't. She survived for some time after the shots. Even with all that, something didn't make sense. In that case, the family had no enemies. They were well liked by the community. There were no threats, public conflicts, or any history of violence. With no clear motive, police pursued the most common hypothesis for that region. Maybe a robbery gone wrong, a robbery followed by murder, or a violent theft. That's when Don Steenkamp was called in to give his formal statement. According to him, the day had been absolutely normal. The family went to church, came back home, and everyone had lunch together. He later said he went horseback riding with his sister. At night, the father sat next to Martella to watch television, while the mother was using the computer, everything as part of their routine. Don said he joined them, but he didn't like what was on television. At that moment, according to him, the father asked him to go to the barn to fix some lights, and he went while he was in the barn. He stated that he heard the gunshots back at the house. He said he was terrified, very scared, and then decided to wait a few minutes before returning. "I'll be there." So, the reason why he was the only surviving victim? When the boy finally returned home, he found the family lying on the floor. Don said that he realized only Martella was still alive. He hugged her, and shortly after, she died in his arms. According to Don himself, the weapons used in the crime were lying in a patch of dirt near the door of the house. He said that he picked up those weapons, got into his father's car, and went to the police to ask for help. Because of the brutality of the crime and the number of forensic examinations, the burial took longer than usual during that period. Everyone saw Don as what he appeared to be. A devastated teenager, he cried and was comforted by his grandparents. He just seemed like a 15-year-old boy who had lost his entire family all at once in a massacre. But that image soon began to unravel quickly, shortly after the family's funeral. Teachers and classmates noticed a sudden change in Don's behavior. He seemed better, more communicative, more confident. It was as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He easily made friends, a big change from the reserved boy he once was. For the first time, he was seen as popular at school. He even signed up for equestrian competitions, riding the horse that had belonged to Martella. Meanwhile, another ruling raised questions in the case. In the will left by the Steenkamp family, the parents had named a family friend as the legal guardian of the children in case something happened to them. This friend refused the request. He said that the best thing for Don would be to stay with his own family, but Don did not accept it. He requested that his guardian be the coach of the school soccer team, a person who, interestingly, did not have a good relationship with his father. And at this moment, I'm sure that most of us are building the links of a criminal chain, aren't we? All the psychological elements may be behind all of this, and I still don't know what's going to happen, but earlier I found myself questioning this scar, these marks from previous sexual abuse before the crime was committed. Maybe it could give rise to the idea of revenge, maybe, right? Well, let's see what the investigation reveals to us. Well, even with this unusual attitude, I would say from Don wanting the teacher, the team coach, to be his legal guardian. Even so, the lawyers understood and granted the request. Meanwhile, the hypothesis of robbery followed by murder began to fall apart. It didn't make any sense. Nothing was stolen. Money, cell phones, computers, and valuables were all still there in plain sight. There were no signs of a struggle inside the house either, and the family's dogs were loose, alive, and uninjured. In robberies in that area, it was common for criminals to poison the dogs before acting, but nothing like that had happened there. The police then began to consider another possibility, the one I mentioned to you: revenge. The question was, for those who didn't know about these supposed abuses until then, revenge for what, why, and from whom? No answers came up, and one detail had been bothering the investigators from the very beginning. If the crime was committed by someone from outside, why was Don the only one spared? And why? Referring to Don's testimony, right? He was in the barn and only went there later, hiding in fear. If it was an intentional attack, why didn't anyone search for the boy nearby? With no concrete progress, rumors started to spread. The cruelest of them said that Don wasn't the couple's biological son, and that upon discovering this, he became enraged and killed the whole family. The rumors spread throughout the school. Classmates started to reject him, and parents pressured the school administration to have him expelled. Don was suspended for a short period, but eventually returned, since, officially, he was not considered a suspect of anything at all. As the weeks went by, Don's image as just a victim began to crack. Small details that seemed irrelevant at first started to bother the investigators. One of them came to light thanks to one of the police officers who responded to the incident that night. He recalled something odd while the police were still at the house handling the bodies. Don asked, far too calmly for that moment, how the process worked to receive the family inheritance. Besides that, during the time he stayed at the place, he took a shower and changed his clothes. And when the clothes he was wearing on the night of the crime were analyzed, the experts found gunpowder residue. Don claimed that this could be easily explained. He said that he had been shooting all afternoon, which is common in that region where young people have access to firearms from an early age. But there was another problem. The pattern of bloodstains on his clothes matched the position of someone who fired a gun, not just someone who was giving aid. The shirt he was wearing was torn, and bloodstains were also found in the barn, the same place where he claimed to be when he heard the shots. Another detail also caught attention. On the same day of the crime, Don started accusing a classmate, without any evidence, just out of nowhere. He sent messages saying that the boy's DNA would be at the crime scene and that he was the real one responsible for the family's death. This happened even before any official forensic results. For the investigators, this was a clear sign of desperation or an attempt to divert attention. Little by little, the pieces started to fit together. The links started to close. 4 months after the crime, in August 2012, Don Steenkamp was finally arrested. The charges were serious: 3 homicides and sexual assault. Initially, the judge denied any possibility of bail and ordered that he remain in custody until the trial. The defense filed an appeal, and a new judge decided to grant bail, with strict conditions, homeschooling, and constant supervision by the legal guardian. Thus, time passed, and the trial began on March 11, 2013. Don claimed innocence from day one. Throughout the trial, 91 witnesses were heard: experts, police officers, teachers, schoolmates, and forensic specialists. The investigation showed that there were no tire marks except for the family's own car at the scene. No sign of another vehicle, no strange footprints. The question was simple then, and even though it wasn't disturbing, how could someone from outside have reached that house? Another question also came up again. Why didn't Don call emergency services right at the moment he heard the gunshots? He had his cell phone with him. A call could have brought help faster, maybe even saved someone. Even so, he chose to wait and then drive to the police. In his defense about this, Don said he panicked, claimed he believed everyone was already dead, but the experts emphasized Marthella was still alive when he got to the house, and there was more. Examinations showed Marthella's last sexual abuse was about 12 hours before her death. The old scars indicated that this wasn't an isolated incident, as I mentioned. 3 hypotheses were analyzed. The first, the father had been abusing his daughter for years. The second, Don and Marthella had a recurring sexual relationship. The third, the injuries could have been caused by natural factors or self-inflicted wounds. The latter was ruled out after detailed examinations. The trial lasted for more than 5 months, and, in the end, the reconstruction presented by the prosecution was devastating, according to the investigators. After church, Don and Marthella went horseback riding, and another abuse happened. This time, Marthella fought back and threatened to tell their parents. Later, sitting next to his father watching television, Don began to believe that the revelation was imminent. Driven by fear, he then went to his parents' room and took Dion's guns. His father. The first attack was against his mother, and John tried to defend her. He grabbed Don by the shirt, which would explain the tear found in the clothing. Then Don shot his father and then his sister. Marthella still managed to run toward the barn, where the two got into a physical struggle. Finally, Don took her back inside the house and fired the last shot. And if we think about the fact that they found blood in the barn, this theory from the investigators makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? In August 2014, the verdict was announced. Don Steenkamp was found guilty of the 3 murders and of the sexual assault against Marthella. The sentence? 60 years without parole. Actually, there were separate sentences, 20 years for each murder, plus additional sentences for the abuse. Anyway, there were other crimes being tried as well, but the bottom line is that he got 60 years. The defense said they would appeal, but for many years nothing changed. But there's always a but, isn't there? This story isn't over yet. Years passed since the trial, time moved on, life went on, at least for some. However, in Griekwastad, the name Steenkamp was never forgotten. In December of 2025, the case returned to the news. The man convicted of murdering his own parents and sister, now about 30 years old, was once again brought before a parole board. And this time, the request was granted, which suggests that there had been other requests during all this time. The news, of course, hit the community like a bomb. Old wounds were touched and reopened. Fear returned, and so did indignation, of course. Obviously, too, because for many people, no matter how many years have passed, there isn't enough time to erase what happened on that farm. And the question still echoes today in that small, quiet, rural town. How can someone who destroyed their own family ever return to live in freedom? There's a lot of symbolism there, isn't there? I think it goes far beyond those shallow and offensive arguments that I often or sometimes receive as the spokesperson for these stories here. There's a symbolism, isn't there? But I'd like to know what you think about it. Drawing a parallel here, let's remember the most famous case in Brazil, maybe. Richthofen von Richthofen. Is it reasonable for someone who actively participated in the manipulation, in the planning of the death of her parents in such a brutal, violent, and above all, cowardly way, to be free, to be serving her sentence in an open regime? Does it make any logical sense in a society that lacks security, that needs to convey the perception that brutalities like this will not go unpunished? Many people sometimes in the insults they direct at me say things like, "Go study, you punitive guy," and blah blah blah. Well, Suzanne, I think she studied a lot, didn't she? Much more than I did, because I'm the son of a bus driver and a housemaid. She must have studied a lot more, but even so, she still had the disposition. Evil, evil for the sake of evil, to do what she did, and now she's out there, free as a bird. Even with her social media growing like crazy, right? It's something surreal, at least for me, it's surreal. If someone disagrees, I can only say sorry, but for me it's surreal. And it made me remember, I needed to make this correlation because there, apparently, people from that community have the same perception. With the possibility of this guy getting out after such a short time, actually not just the possibility, he got out according to the latest news. He's on parole. Strange. But again, what's your opinion on all this? That's today's episode. Thanks for joining. Kiss from Ruivo. See you next time.